welcome back to Reich Reenacting. I'm joined today by a wonderful friend of mine who does World War I reenacting, and we thought we would do an interesting comparison of the general soldier from World War I versus World War II, as well as the differences in their uniforms and the general kit and the equipment that they carried, and kind of, some of their different ideological differences and that kind of thing versus the First and Second World Wars. So, Carl, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
Doing well.
Now, hi there. My name is Carl, and I am representing a soldier of the Royal Bavarian Army during World War I. I'll be going over my kit with my friend here, and we are going to be talking about the various differences that the soldier of World War I would have dealt with versus the soldier of World War II, specifically at the end of their respective wars. I'm representing the Kaiserschlacht, and he is representing the Battle of Berlin. We'll be going over in detail the differences between the kit of a soldier of his respective battle, and we will be going into how they compare to each other. The same country, 30 years apart.
So, Carl, a couple first questions with your uniform. Let's start at the top here. Go with your hat. So explain a little bit about your hat. Why you've got the little, what's your little metal discs up on top?
Right. Now this is the M1907/10 Feldmütze. This represents that I am an enlisted man, and this is what I would have worn in the off season or when I'm not in battle.
Okay.
Now, it represents two different things here. The top disc up here represents the German Empire, the Schwarz-Weiß-Rot.
Okay.
And the bottom button here, this represents your state. So, for example, I am a Bavarian, so we have white, blue, and white. These are the colors on the Bavarian flag, and every state has their own unique one. So, for example, Prussia has black, white, black, and Württemberg has black, red, black, and so on and so forth.
Interesting.
Now, this badge right here, this is the interesting one because this usually represents mountaineers, the Edelweiss.
Right.
Now,
And that carried on to World War II. No, mountain troops for World War II would have also worn an Edelweiss. But go ahead.
Right.
Why is it interesting on yours?
Right. Now, this is interesting on mine because this was actually a gift to my unit, the Königliche Bayerisches Leibregiment, from the Austrian Kaiserschützen during the Carpathian campaign. So,
it was more of it wasn't necessarily an award, but it was more of like a token of respect from the one unit to the other?
That's right.
Okay.
That's how it was. And the Leib carried this with them all the way through the end of the war to show their bravery, since the Edelweiss in German culture is a symbol of bravery.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. Then the contrast, let's go down to your uniform. What's the tunic you got here? I see you have no pockets at the top here, so...
That's correct. Now, this is the M16 model tunic.
Okay.
Now, this is a little different from the standard issue one throughout the rest of the German Empire. The normal one would have a bottle green collar, much like the early war Wehrmacht in World War II.
Okay, very interesting.
And the reason why this is different is because this is a specific tunic made for the Bavarian army. So my collar is the exact same color as the rest of the tunic, and I have a unique trim here along with Lietzen.
All right.
So the trim.
Yeah, what's the trim? Go for it.
Right. The trim represents that I am a Bavarian. Now, throughout the German Empire, the various different states had various different levels of autonomy, and the Kingdom of Bavaria was actually the second largest and second most powerful in the German Empire, right behind Prussia.
Okay.
So, when they were able to unify with the rest of Germany, Bavaria pretty much negotiated for a little more autonomy when it came to the military, so they were allowed to have their own unique Pickelhaube plate, and they were allowed to keep some uniqueness of the uniform. So, for example, they were allowed to get, when the time came to switch over to a more simplified tunic for the war, they were allowed to get a different model, and they were allowed to get the Tresse here. This is the proper term, and as you can see here, it is the Bavarian flag.
Right, again with that white and blue motif, right?
Right.
Okay.
Now, various different units, depending on how elite you were, would have had different variations of the tresses. So, for example, standard infantry would have had just this one right here, this strip going down the collar, And if you were an officer or an NCO, you would have had it going all around, much like what I have.
Okay.
Now, I'm unique because I am a Royal Guard, the Königliche Bayerisches Leibregiment, once again.
Right, because you're not an officer, but you've got the trim going all the way around, so...
Right. And also this represents the Lietzen as well. This was sort of the motif to represent the Royal Guards, and this symbolized that we were a cut above the rest. We were only the fittest to serve His Majesty King Ludwig III of Bavaria.
Okay, interesting. And then, what about with your shoulder boards or shoulder straps right there? I see you've got like a little red crown as well as the white piping, so go ahead.
That's right. So, the red crown here, this also represents the fact that I am a Royal Guard.
Mm-hmm.
Various units would have had their own little motifs on here.
Right.
So, for example, we would have had some that are just the numbers. So, for example, IR-10 would just have number 10, and some of them would have unique ones, like also Bavarian IR-10. They would have had number 10, but had have a crown above it. So
the crown was specifically Bavarian. Bavarian units would have worn a little crown.
Not necessarily. There would have been some specifics. I forget exactly what it is that represents putting a crown on your uniform, but some of the unique units did have it. And the color here, which is also Feldgrau here, this represents, once again, a little different branch of service. So every unit had unique ones. So, for example, I believe artillery was yellow. Special troops like the engineers, they would have been black and red with a red trim around it. And standard infantry would have just been gray, and the piping depends on, I forget what it is, but I think it's what company you serve in or specific unit. So, for example, mine is white, but other units would have had a red piping.
Okay, interesting. And then going down on your uniform a little bit more, we can see that you don't have buttons on it, whereas mine does.
Not necessarily. I do have buttons, they're just hidden. See?
Okay. So yours are hidden, so it gives it a little more of a clean, presentable appearance. I like that. Going down, let's look at your belt buckle. What do we got on the belt buckle?
Right. So we have here the traditional symbol of the German Empire during this time, the crown.
Right.
Now this would vary. This depended on what branch you were in. So this represents the infantry, the naval infantry, and the colonial troops would have had a slightly different variation of the crown, but it would still be in the same, and it would still have the motto right above it.
Okay.
For example, mine right here is In Treue fest, in steadfast loyalty, unlike the Prussian one, which was Gott mit uns, and I'm sure you're more familiar with that.
Right.
So,
that one carried on to World War II for the standard Wehrmacht. The standard Wehrmacht belt buckle had Gott mit uns on it as well. So, a couple things that kind of have carried over from the Imperial German Empire into the Third Reich era, but Bavaria specifically seems like going along with a little more of that autonomy, and they got to keep some of their traditional military stuff that was different from the rest of the empire. They got a different slogan.
That's right. Okay. And it also depends on, again, what state you're representing. So, for example, Württembergers would have had something else, and the Saxons would have had something else.
Okay. So it also was kind of dependent on the state itself.
That's right. Much like the button up here,
right.
It would have been different depending on what state you're in.
Interesting. Okay. Very cool. Trousers kind of seem pretty similar to mine. These are straight leg trousers, I assume?
Straight leg trousers, pretty standard, not a whole lot to talk about.
Yeah, not too much.
Right.
And then your boots here, I see you've got the tall jack boots, right? And we got hobnails on the bottom, same as mine.
Yep.
What about your little strap here? Is that anything special?
Pretty much it's to tighten up the boots whenever you're on the march, and they slide around a lot, so you can pretty much put them on, put this on, strap it up to the appropriate tightness for how you want it on your boot, and then it won't slide around as much. It's pretty much shoelaces,
but for a boot. Interesting. Right. Okay. Very cool, very cool. So again, in World War II, earlier war, the Germans would have also had high jack boots, but then as the war went further on, they ended up going over to these low boots with Gemeschen or gaiters. So it helped save on material costs, much less leather needed to make it, and it just ended up being, more of what am I looking for here? Shortages in more material caused a necessity for change. So, but Okay, so we've reviewed your uniform and your basic kind of dress, I guess, going out dress. But then on my side, what do you see that is different than what you're used to?
Right. Now, specifically, the emblem on your cap, the Totenkopf.
Okay.
What can you tell us about that? Because it does have roots before the Third Reich, and how did it evolve into the symbol of the SS?
Very good. So the Totenkopf here, as you can see on the front of my cap, now I've got the standard model M43 SS cap, the Einheitsfeldmütze. This had a button-down flap that you could use to pull down for greater warmth in the wintertime, or if it was like really windy or that kind of thing. But specifically talking about the Totenkopf here, these, as far as I can recall, was what was it, the Royal Hussars, the Blackguard
Right.
Hussars?
Right.
They were the first ones that had the Totenkopf, and their whole thing, it had nothing to do with like, you know, scary Third Reich skull stuff, but it was, wasn't it to like remind them of their, to never be afraid to like sacrifice their lives for their country.
Right,
for their
the
king.
memento mori.
Right, memento mori, remember that you will die. So, interesting enough that the SS ended up carrying this on, and now you see this on the SS cap. On the side of it, I've also got the eagle here, which ended up becoming the standard symbol of the SS, with clutching the little swastika and the wreath down there at the bottom. So, and then, what I can tell from another difference from yours has no visor. This one has a visor. I think that would be kind of helpful for you if you had a visor, you know, help protect from the sun, that kind of thing. But, you know, hey, came along later, and 30 years later, you see now troops are wearing a visor instead of, what is yours called again?
The Feldmütze.
Feldmütze, just a standard Feldmütze. Okay.
Now, going down to your uniform, let's talk about the symbols on yours. So, for example, let's talk about your collar tabs here, the SS runes and the one black one.
Okay.
What can you tell us about that?
So, on my collar here, kind of like his, I have insignia. I've got one square patch that has two Sieg runes on it, and then one that's blank. The blank one over here indicates my rank. So in this case, I'm a enlisted man, or a SS Mann. So if I was higher in rank, I would end up getting little stripes or little pips on the collar here that would indicate my rank. So interesting, different from yours, is that your collar tabs don't indicate rank, right?
Right.
Okay. On the other one, with the two runes on it, this is the traditional Sieg rune, which in traditional German culture represented victory, and it also, it also looks very similar to an S. So when Himmler was coming up with the SS, the Schutzstaffel, it ended up fitting perfectly kind of with their whole motto of, you know, they had total confidence in their beliefs and in victory, that they were going to win in the end, and then having two of those, well, you have the Schutzstaffel, SS, and then the Sieg rune, so it just kind of fit perfectly all around.
Right. And then your epaulets, what can you tell us about those, since they're in black with white trim, unlike mine?
Okay. So something that was interesting about the SS versus the normal Wehrmacht, or the army, is that the SS ones were trimmed in black, and that was standard all across the SS. That was something that they did kind of along with the black collar tabs to help set them apart as being their own thing. The white trim on mine indicates that I'm part of the infantry, so similar to yours. The SS and the army across the Third Reich for World War II ended up implementing a system where your piping on your epaulets here would indicate not what branch of service, but what like specific subset you were. So, for example, white was infantry, you had your yellow as cavalry, red was artillery, blue was medical, pink was like panzer troops, etc., going forward. So, glancing at a man's shoulder boards and seeing what color it was a really easy way to indicate what very subset of, you know, whatever service he was a part of.
Right. And one of the other things that I noticed is the difference between your SS tunic and a standard Wehrmacht tunic is that over your right breast you do not have a Reichsadler. Why is that?
I do not. So, good observation. The standard Wehrmacht and Army eagle would have been worn over here, but the SS, being their own separate kind of what's the word I'm looking for
Unit?
here? Unit. Yeah, they were more of a militarized political organization instead of like a proper army subset. They wore an eagle on their sleeve right here. So kind of same emblem that was on the hat, just a little bit bigger. But again, it's with that SS eagle with his straight wings coming out to a point here, and then again crutching that little wreath with a swastika in it. So again, that's the difference between the normal here and the rest of the German services for World War II and the SS. And then again, back in your day when you were fighting, that wasn't any insignia that you had.
Right. There were no political symbols other than those of the Empire.
Right.
And about your belt buckle, what can you tell us about that? Since
Okay.
I understand that it does not have the standard motto of Gott mit uns. What does it have instead?
It doesn't. Good observation. So this one, again, going with that same kind of SS eagle, clutching the swastika in that wreath there. But now this one says, Mein Ehr heißt Treu, or my honor is my loyalty. So unlike the Wehrmacht, which we already established, they had that Gott mit uns slogan carried over from the German Empire. Now the SS come in here, and they're more, again, kind of focusing on that political background and that part. Now their slogan is, my honor is my loyalty. So they are, committed, loyal to Hitler, to the SS, to the Third Reich, that kind of thing. And they leaned more on that instead of, I guess, loyalty to like the particular state or that kind of thing.
Right.
So, and that kind of also deals with the background of it that under the Third Reich, everything was kind of trying to be unified into one particular German state. Everyone was all the same. There were no, state differences, that kind of thing. Whereas back in your day, it seems like there was a lot more.
Yes.
It was kind of like your state and then the empire as a whole. Whereas with me, it was kind of all just kind of mush it together to make just one unified Reich.
Right. Yeah. And then going down to your pants, pretty standard. However, I did notice that your tunic and your pants are two different shades of gray. What's going on there?
Okay, interesting. Yes. With my pants and my tunic here, basically this is very late war. I'm working with what I've got. So later in the war, your material and the quality of your wool ends up deteriorating as, again, supply shortages and that kind of thing starts going on. So my tunic is the M42 tunic, and it's of a little bit higher quality than the pants here. The pants here are the M43 model, and by this time the wool color and quality has started to degrade a little bit more, and now you can see now it's a little bit of a different shade. It's also a little bit, of, like I said, a thinner quality, and it's not as good, and that, again, just more of, unlike you kind of had a little more, didn't have as much like shortages in supply and that kind of thing as the war progressed with the Third Reich, and especially as the war continued, as things started to deteriorate, then you'd see this kind of thing as production quality couldn't be maintained throughout the war.
Right. And now moving on to your boots, what can you tell us about those, since they're shorter than mine and you also have a pair of Gamaschen to go with them?
Right. So again, like I said, they still have hobnails, but these are your low boots and the Gamaschen. These were worn, you see them pop up around 1942, if I recall correctly, but as the war went on, they became more and more prevalent because, again, making your big, tall jackboots takes up a ton of leather, and the army they realized that if you cut all this leather off here and just made it a low boot, then you're saving so much more leather that can be used in making more boots. So we've got the Gamaschen here, which is just simply some canvas with little buckles on them, and that was just to help protect the top of your ankle there, as well as go over the top of the boot in case of like mud or that kind of thing. You get into it, but it was just more of a protection for it. So again, later in the war, I'm wearing late war stuff, and it's production resources are deteriorating, and now I'm getting lower quality materials than what we started with at the beginning of the war.
Right. Now with those differences, we'll move over to talking about our gear and equipment that we would have used in the field. So we have here the standard issue kit of the German infantryman during World War I. This is what the soldier would have worn throughout his campaign of 1914 through 1918, and we'll start off here with the web gear. So, we have the standard issue kit of what an infantryman would have worn. You have your belt buckle, your ammo pouches, your bread bag, your canteen, your Feldspaten, your bayonet, and your bread bag strap.
Okay, so this looks pretty similar to what I wore, or what I wear in World War II. We've got ammo pouches. Yours are just in brown versus mine in black.
Right.
I've got a bread bag as well, shovel, bayonet, all that kind of thing.
Right.
One interesting thing I see here is you've got 2 canteens. So
that's
what's
right.
up with that?
That's right. So this was the variation of the canteen later in the war, the M1915 variant. Now, High Command, as the war went on, they decided that soldiers need water to survive, and more water means your soldiers can operate in the field for longer. So, what we had here was 2 canteens were issued out to troops. So, 1 canteen should last you 24 hours, so all in all, it should be able to last 48 hours before needing a refill.
Okay, interesting. Another thing here I see is you've got your bread bag, strap, and it's attached on either side to your pouches. Now, do you wear that like you kind of would Y straps, or what is this for?
That's right. So, during World War I, soldiers did not actually have Y straps. That was only for the cavalry. So, standard infantry like me would have had to rely either on really tightening up your belt so that it won't slide anywhere, or you have to go with your bread bag strap. So you attach that to the little hooks right here on your ammo pouches, and then you wrap that around your neck, and you have that as the suspenders.
Interesting. And one other thing I noticed over here with your bayonet is that it's way longer than mine is. So
that's right. That is the butcher's blade variant of the bayonet, and this was what the soldiers would have marched off to war with during the Guns of August in 1914. So, pretty much every metal firm in Germany had some variation of supplying the army with stuff. So, for example, the company logo that you can actually see, flip it over, that you can actually see right here, they are actually still in business to this day.
Interesting.
Yes. Now, there were several different variants of the bayonet, and one of the most famous ones was the sawback. This would have been issued to pioneers and the like, and interestingly enough, if you were actually caught as a soldier being captured with a sawback bayonet, you stood the risk of being executed for, you see, various soldiers of the Entente powers, the Allies in this case, they would have been not very accepting of you having such a brutal weapon on you. It's much like shotguns in the German Empire. If you're caught with one, you're executed.
Interesting. Now with that, let's move on here, and I see we've got this helmet right here. What's up with this? This is really strange compared to what I'm used to.
That's right. Now this is the Pickelhaube, and this is sort of the object that you cannot talk about World War I German uniforms without mentioning. Once again, this is what the soldiers would have marched off to war with during 1914, and this stayed in service until 1916, I believe, and later on with several ceremonial models. So, for example, if you're on parade, you wear your Pickelhaube. Now, the Pickelhaube actually went through several different variations through the war. So, for example, this is the sort of extreme early war variant. So, it's made of leather, and none of the parts detach. And you have this very ornate looking chin strap here with various scales and whatnot. Once again, this is to represent that I am Guard Infantry. I am not Standard Infantry. I am the Royal Guardians of His Majesty the King. You also notice here that we have my state's emblem here. This is Bavaria with the 2 lions and the crest in the middle, along with In Treue Fest, the state motto. Now, later in the war, as it progressed, the materials, much like your uniform, started degrading, so eventually they would switch over to not leather, so they can have pouches, boots, belts, etc., etc., and the spike on the Pickelhaube would actually be able to come off, which it cannot on this variant. Now, the reason why it has a spike, actually, is because of cavalry. So, for example, if you're in a one-on-one fight with a man with a saber, and he hits the spike, it's going to bounce off and hit right back at him.
Interesting. So this is a relic, sort of, kind of a relic carrying over from the previous century when, battles were fought much more, line upon line, you row upon row, and then you meet out and fight each other just head on. And then, World War I came along, and this was kind of left over from that era, but even though everything had moved on to trenches and much more brutal fighting, with digging in on both sides and artillery and that kind of thing.
Right.
I also see here you've got your little white, blue, white.
That's right.
And
so
then the black, white, red. Those are both, again,
yes.
the state and then Empire's colors.
That's right. That's right. Same idea, just different placement.
Interesting. So it carries over from your Feldmütze to your Pickelhaube as well.
That's right.
With your grenade over here, I see this looks pretty similar to what I use, except you've got a clip. Is that literally just to be able to hold it?
Yeah, pretty much. What you can do is that you can attach it in actually your belt, and you can have it hanging down. So in case you need ease of access, you can just take it out, pull the pin, and let her fly.
So this is far more practical than what I had to do instead of tucking them into my belt for World War II. So
right.
It seems like something that we could have actually used to stick around for, and it would have been helpful.
Right.
Interesting. Then if we move again over here, we've got this little canister. I assume, what is this, your gas mask canister?
That's correct. That is the gas mask can. So, if you open it up here, you will see that in case of the gas attack, you can just open it up, and you can pull out your mask and put it on.
This seems a little more primitive than what I'm working with in World War II. Mine's made out of rubber and has looks like to be a little more of a sophisticated filter than you've got.
Right. Now, this is actually one of the later variants, the Ledermaske. Now, some of the earlier ones were made of rubber, I believe, and sheepskin, and eventually those materials, they were becoming scarce, so later in the war, they actually had to ask, the Germans did, they had to ask one of their allies, the Tsardom of Bulgaria, to help supply them with leather, which is where these masks came from.
Interesting. Now, were these still fairly effective at getting, blocking the gas as they were the earlier models of rubber and sheepskin?
Yes, they were.
Okay, very cool. And then looks like same thing here with mine. In your lid, you've still got
Yes.
the
It's a little stiff there.
your spare lenses. Hold on.
A little stiff.
Well.
Yeah, well.
Same thing as with the World War II version, he carried spare lenses in the top of the mask in case one gets cracked or shatters. So.
Right, so you can do that in your off time and have it ready to go for the next gas attack.
Interesting. And then moving on down here, I see we've got this very ornate. What is this, a pipe?
That's right. That is a tobacco pipe. So, smoking during the Victorian era and eventually into the Edwardian, or in the Germans' case, the Wilhelmine period, smoking was considered to be a sign that you were masculine and engaged in such activities. You were a real man if you smoked. Now, however, one difference between all of this is that smoking had various different levels to it. So, for example, real men smoke pipes or cigars. Now, cigarettes, though, they had a bit of a different reputation. Cigarettes, they had a bit of a reputation for being effeminate and girly if you smoked them, much like their users. And in the United States, it was mostly seen cigarette smoking as something that only criminals and lowlifes would do. And eventually, when World War I came around, these stigmas sort of went the wayside, since they realized people need to smoke to calm their nerves, and bringing an elaborate pipe like this would be horribly impractical, so cutting down the size, still getting the same product, you can see why the switch to cigarettes was so prominent.
Interesting. Now this is the King of Bavaria, right? Remind me his name? That's
correct. This is King Ludwig II, one of the ancestors of the reigning monarch when I would be in time, King Ludwig III. This is the King Ludwig II, he was probably the most famous Bavarian king because he made several vanity projects, was insane, and such as the Neuschwanstein, very famous popular tourist attraction to this day. And to this day, King Ludwig II is still revered as sort of a hero in Bavaria.
Interesting. So varies greatly from the very simplified and much smaller pipe that I had in World War II, or in most cases just cigarettes. So.
Right.
Okay. And then if we go on down, I see you've got a tornister.
That's right.
And this is similar to mine, but I see we've got these little straps here. I don't have these, so what's this? What would you put there?
Now those straps there, that's where you would put your mess tin while you're on the march. So you would strap it up, and then you would have it facing outwards while you're on the march, along with all your other worldly possessions as a soldier. So you would have your blanket roll and your Zeltbahn and your greatcoat all rolled into one, wrapped around and secured.
And again, it's got straps on the back here that you would just throw this over your back?
Essentially,
like
yes.
A backpack?
Essentially, yes.
Okay. Another interesting thing I see is that whereas with mine, I've got fur on just the face here, you've got fur on just about every possible surface that we've got. We've got on the sides and all that. So, again, was this still just like decorative kind of thing? But
essentially, yes.
Made it look cool?
Essentially, yes. This is actually horsehair, and later in the war, around 1916, they still needed tornisters, but they did not have a whole lot of horses left after 1914 and the disaster that was realizing war is not fought the same.
Mm-hmm.
So, eventually this became more of a cloth material, so horsehair was phased out in favor of a more simplified cloth, and that's how the rest of the war was fought with the ersatz 1916 model.
Interesting. Okay. Now, over here to this little blue thing. This looks like a bandolier kind of thing?
That's correct. That's exactly what it is.
Okay.
So the bandolier, you would have your ammo stashed right in these pockets right here on either side, and whenever you were ready, the ammo itself would actually be stored inside of these little pouches, and when the time comes, you would rip the seam open and you would load up and continue to shoot it all until you're done.
Interesting. So these little white tabs at the end would have like sewn over, and then you just tear them out?
Right.
Okay, so it keeps in place. Interesting, because I know that the Fallschirmjägers, or the paratroopers for World War II, had a similar bandolier like this, except theirs had little snaps that folded over on both sides instead of little cloth ones. So interesting to see that this is still kind of, it was still in use in a different form during World War II, whereas this was something that the soldiers carried in World War I for just extra ammunition.
That's right. That's right.
Then going down here, we've got, what is this, a boot knife or just another trench knife, fighting knife?
That is a trench knife, specifically, I believe, a Boker model. So, what you would do here is that the variation on the back here, this little tab here, much like on the grenade, you could just attach this anywhere you want on your belt, and you can have it at the ready for whenever you're going, say, on a trench raid, and you need a lightweight weapon that's effective and short, and you can carry it with you at all costs.
Okay, very good, very good. Then, if we go over to this little pouch here, what is this? This is very brightly colored and fancy, so
that's right.
Explain a little bit.
Now that is the Soldbuch pouch. That is where you would have kept your identification documents inside. And soldiers during World War I, they were actually encouraged to decorate their Soldbuch pouches up to sort of symbolize individuality and basically get creative, since Germans are a very creative people by nature, so they can express it in various little trench arts. So for example, the art that I chose for myself here is the flag of Bavaria, along with my crowns on my epaulets, along with a laurel wreath to represent victory, and my unit markings down here, ILR.
Okay, very cool, very cool. So in World War II, we would have just had the book itself without any of this fancy stuff, and we just kept that in our pocket. So definitely some little manner of self-expression that wasn't carried over into the Second World War.
Right.
So,
right.
Moving on down here, I see we've got, is this a Krug?
Yes, that is it.
Bavarian.
Yep. Bierstein. During World War I, once again, beer was actually a very, very important part of the soldiers' diet. Bavaria was actually one of the only kingdoms to actually have beer as part of their standard rations. The standard styles would usually be a Märzen or a Weissbier.
Okay. Interesting. So that would have been something that the soldier would have carried around with him as much as he possibly could, because beer was still quite commonplace in German culture. That and especially with you Bavarians, you would have been issued it as part of your rations.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Very cool.
And moving on here, we have the M16 model Stahlhelm. Now, this is what eventually replaced the Pickelhaube. You can see that it is slightly different from the later World War II models. There were actually 3 different variants of the Stahlhelm made during World War I. This is the earliest example here with the M16. The M17 simplified the chin straps a little to make it a lot less uncomfortable, and the M18 was essentially a little smaller to cut down on resources. And there was also a variation where they had cutouts in the ears to improve hearing. This was especially prominent on cavalry models.
Okay, on the side here, kind of like that, it would
That's right.
curve up. Okay,
That's
I think
right.
I've seen those before.
Right.
One other thing is these little pokey bits right here. What are those for?
Right. Those are the horns, quote unquote. So these would actually be for ventilating your head, and another purpose, which was to mount a protective armor plate on the front. This would primarily be used by units such as machine gunners and snipers, people who aren't going to be moving around a whole lot, and they're going to be in one place, give them a little extra protection.
Okay, so it would protect against enemy snipers. Again, since they're not going to be moving much, the enemy snipers would see, oh, there's a guy right here consistently poking up. But since they'd have the extra protection, then it would be able to repulse sniper rounds.
Right,
Okay.
and also give them a little extra protection from artillery fire.
Okay, very cool, very cool. And then the very end here, I see we've got, what is this? We got a C96?
That's right. Now, pistols were primarily used, much like in World War II, by the officers. However, eventually, as the war progressed, and assault units such as the Stoßtruppe and Sturmtruppe, they needed lightweight weapons that they could carry around with them, and it wouldn't be very large, however, it could still kill all the same. So, they would primarily operate with pistols, grenades, and knives. Now, this is just one of the various pistols that would have been used during World War I. Various other ones included the Luger P08 and the Taschen Pistol 1914, also a Mauser product, and the Dreise.
Okay. And then this wooden stock is basically, so to speak, it's holster.
Right.
But if I recall correctly, right, you can mount it on the end here to actually give the pistol itself a stock.
That's correct, you can.
Okay.
So you can turn it into a form of a carbine to improve your accuracy, and also to make it so that you can carry it a lot more effective, and it can be more effective at longer distances.
Interesting. And then one last little thing. What's this little piece on the side? Is this like a cleaner for it?
Yeah, exactly. That's the cleaning rod for it. So you carry it with you at all times, and in the case that you need to clean your barrel, you just take that out, attach the little doohickey on the bottom to put the cloth in, and then you can ram it down.
Interesting. Very good.
Now, with that out of the way, we're going to move over to the World War II German kit.
And now here we have the layout of the basic kit for the World War II German soldier. So, starting at the top here, again, the basic layout of the equipment that would have been worn on the belts. You have your ammo pouches in black, similar to the ones that they would have had in World War I, except just different color. Bayonet, as we had described, much shorter than the World War I version. Canteen and bread bag, but all unlike the World War I one, I've only got a single canteen here, which is 0.75 liters, if I believe correctly.
Now, Now, what is the cap here on top of your canteen? What's that all about?
Okay, so this is a little cup. If I undo the strap here, these fold out, like so, and then I can just use it as a little cup to pour the water into to drink, or if, you know, it was a stream or something else like that, I could just use it as a convenient little cup that would go on top, so.
And I also noticed that your bread bag, unlike mine, has two different leather straps here where you can attach something. So putting the canteen on, would that have been something where personal preference, like if you're a righty or a lefty, you can put the canteen wherever, or was there a specific standard way to do it?
I've seen it both ways. Yes, there are the two straps there. As far as I understand, regulation was to have your canteen on the right side of your on your bread bag. And then the other strap was actually to carry your mess tin. So they would have had a separate little strap that would loop over your mess tin and you could hold it right there. Although I do see pictures of soldiers wearing their canteen on the left-hand side and they don't have their mess tin there. So it could have been a little more of kind of what you said, you know, as you know, soldiers got in the field and regulations weren't so strictly enforced as in like in training, and it could have been left more to personal preference. But yes, it was originally intended to be a separate strap for the mess tin.
Yeah. And I noticed with the bayonet over here that it is a lot shorter than the World War I variant.
Right.
What can you tell us about that?
So basically, as World War II broke out, unlike in the First World War, it was much more mobile and fluid, whereas with World War I, it was far more static, fighting and trenches and all that. So there was much less emphasis placed on close quarters combat. So in this case, the bayonet is much shorter, like you had said. It helps conserve your resources, and it just wasn't necessary because in most cases you weren't going to see quite nearly as many hand-to-hand combat situations as was prevalent in the First World War.
Now, moving on to the next stage of your kit, what can you tell us about the gas mask can here? What can you tell us about that?
So this one, as you can see, is much bigger than the one in World War II. This comes along because, again, the canister the filter for the gas mask itself was much larger. It ended up taking about probably a good about a third of the actual canister space itself. And then again, the mask itself, unlike as we saw with the World War I variant, was made out of either a rubberized cloth, or the second variation was made out of completely rubber, so it was just kind of bigger and bulkier all around, which in turn leads to a bigger canister. So,
right. And going down here a little, what is this pouch-looking thing right here? What is that?
So this would have been worn on the strap. You can see it has the two little tabs on the back here. You would have threaded your gas mask canister strap through these and then worn this in conjunction with the canister itself, and this was a gas cape. So they were issued a protective cape that was all folded up in here, and then if a gas attack occurred, you would then take the cape out and in conjunction with putting the mask on, throw the cape over yourself as a form of protection as well. So unlike in World War I, World War II did not see the use of gas at all, so this ended up going unused, but it was a safety measure that was taken, as in the beginning of the war, no one knew if gas was still going to be commonplace in using on both sides. So this would have been worn in conjunction with the canister itself.
Now moving on, we have your Stahlhelm. What can you tell us about this particular variant? I noticed it has the SS runes on it, so why is that?
Okay, so this is the Model 40, the M40 of the World War II Stahlhelm, and as you pointed out, it has the decal on it. Early in the war, all across the German armed forces, they were given decals that marked their helmets. Early war, they had two decals, one on either side, specifically for the SS. The blank one that I'm missing here would have been a shield that had a swastika in the black, white, and red border, which again was, on the flag and at this point the national symbol of Germany. Other side, as we see, has the shield with the SS runes. Later in the war, that ended up being the more brightly colored red, black, and white one was phased out, as it ended up being too much of a marker for snipers to be able to fire at. Another thing you notice is that I don't have the little horns on the side here. Instead, I just have these little, basically rivets that are put into the side of the helmet. So just helps save on space a little bit more than the World War I version. But same as before, I've got same liner as well as my name written in the bottom there. Only difference is that unlike the World War I version, which had the 3 big pieces of the liner coming together, this one has more spread out across the whole thing.
And moving on, we have what I can only assume to be what you put on the back of your kit. So what can you tell us about that?
Okay, yes, this is an interesting piece, and this is a A-frame, also known as the Gefechtsgepäck, or the assault pack. These were specifically issued to troops that were going to be in frontline fighting and were expected to remain in frontline combat for perhaps days on end. This was actually worn, and the little pouch here at the bottom was specifically regulations stated it was to carry your iron ration as well as the wool sweater and extra pairs of socks as well as whatever else the soldier could stuff in there. So it carried extra food and changes of clothing so that the soldier could survive for longer periods in the field. And then you see on top here we have the mess tin, and I've got mine attached on the A-frame as opposed to on the bread bag, since I've got the A-frame. Another thing is the Zeltbahn that I've got here as my background is reversible, with having both a camouflage pattern of a fall and a summer side, and this would have been rolled up and worn in conjunction with the pack and basically put right on top here and fill out the rest of the space in the straps. So again, just a nicer way to carry it on your back in conjunction with the Y straps, as opposed to wearing it on your belt, as it just becomes heavy and bulky to carry around.
Right. And moving on to your tornister here, what can you tell us about this? I noticed you don't have the leather straps for putting on your mess tin.
Right. This is actually the second model World War II tornister. This is the M1939, and this one was actually made in conjunction to go with the A-frame. You can see with this little pull tab here, and then at the top we've got 2 little clips, one here and one here, that the A-frame was actually supposed to go mounted on top of it. You have the 2 clips on your A-frame would hook into the rings here, and then you'd wear it on top, and you could just carry it all together. But specifically with the mess tin, I was wearing that on the A-frame itself, so there was no need to have the straps here on the top of the tornister. Another thing you can see, I've got my blanket strapped around the top. I've got 3 straps, 1, 2, and 3, holding it in place on all the edges. And if I flip it over, you can see I've got my Y straps attached on the back here, as again with this second model of tornister, it had just little clips coming out of the back here that were specifically designed to integrate into the Y straps, so you would wear it all together. Y straps, A-frame, tornister, all together, and you hook it in the bottom here. This little edge on the edge of your Y strap would hook into the belt, and then you throw it all on and wear it together. So kind of neat how they ended up packing it all together so that the different pieces of equipment all functioned, they harmonized with one another in how they were worn.
And then you have your cup here. This is a little smaller than the beer stein that I have. Was there any differences between like drinking, so to say, in the German and the Reich?
As far as I'm aware, they did away with any sort of beer rationing that would have gone on in World War I. So this is just a cup that I got as kind of a souvenir from a local town, Heidelberg, and the soldier would have just carried this with him as kind of a memento of back home and all the rest of that, as opposed to it being more of a functional piece considering his rations and what he would have had. So this would have just been a nice cup, and to help carry on that German culture and stuff with him wherever the soldier went. Going back over to seeing it all together, and then one last little comparison, panning back over to the World War I equipment. I hope you enjoyed this video. This was quite the opportunity that I had to collaborate with my World War I friend here, Carl. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something with the back and forth comparison, or even just going in depth about some of the cultural differences, or even just backgrounds with the various German states for World War I and the little emblems that they had, that kind of thing. So I hope you both enjoyed the video, and hopefully in the future I'll be able to do more of these collaborationist videos with either Carl here or maybe some other people. So with that being said, please leave a like, share, subscribe, and with that, Prost! Prost!